Hi, my name is Samuel, and this is a re-recording of yesterday's lecture. I just want to make sure that whatever material I put out there is somewhat of a high quality material. Either way, let's get into it. So, you've all worked with Rhino for a little bit, and when you're working in Rhino and you want to start using Twinmotion, it's important to have a few things in mind. Um, Twinmotion is not a modeling software compared to Rhino that is quite sufficient and really good with that. Um, that means that in Twinmotion, you really don't want to like try to sculpt or change your model or change the position of it. Or, in theory, you want to do as little work with your actual model. Where Twinmotion really shines is when it comes to renderings, making pictures, sending out an environment and making the lighting seem natural and whatnot. So it is a really good tool for representation, but not a good tool for creating. And another thing, now that we start, right, is that Rhino and Twinmotion, and actually all softwares use coordinate systems more or less to define where everything is. So if you set a point and you press 0, you'll see that here we have Origo, right? So Origo, we can see it even clearer in shaded, defined by this little plane. It's the center point of the model. So whenever you're referring to or linking models to another software or not, it will always refer to this center point. Why this is important is that, let's say you were to change the position of your model in between, working in Rhino. This will lead to the model changing its position in Twinmotion as well, right? So just make sure that whenever you're working, just keep everything in the same place, and then you can always know where the different parts will end up. Um, so to export from Rhino to Twinmotion, mark whatever you want to export and press export selected. Once you've done that, you want to find a good place to save it. I'm going to save it here. It'd be good to, maybe not there. Here we go. I'm going to save the pathway, but you don't necessarily have to do that. Just need to find it eventually. And then you have to set a type. So in our case, we want to set it into Motion Builder. And here, Motion Builder, FBX. That's the main one that I've been using so far. There might be some other file formats that work as well, but I'd say it's one of the more convenient ones. So let's just import it and call it Pavilion Sketch 2, and let's save. And this should be okay. I would recommend actually using mesh only. And a reason why is that I believe Twinmotion only do meshes in theory. So if you put it, export it as a NURB, it will basically convert the NURBs into meshes, and you get less control over how that step happens. If you press mesh only and you were exporting something that wasn't a mesh originally, you'd have the choice to basically define how well or how fine it will define all the surfaces. I'd go pretty fine, like a lot of polygons, basically. So high fidelity. So once you're in Twinmotion, Um, so let's start by just deleting everything that's in the start file. Oh, yeah, you might have to do this. Okay, cool. Um, and we can start by importing some things. Uh, so when we import, and this is important, right? I usually go for geometry. You can go for some other things, but um, I'd go for geometry. The direct link have sometimes been working pretty fine, and then you can directly link it to Rhino, but I prefer using just FBX. It just seems like a pretty sure way of having it work. So pick your pavilion, and what you'll see here is this collapse all. This is important to think about. Do you want to keep the hierarchy, collapse by material, or collapse all? So keeping the hierarchy will just keep it as it is in like in Rhino. Oh, we can try it out, right? Um, so once the model is in, we can press F, and now compared to Rhino, right? There's a few different ways of moving around. I just showed you how to press F, and if you press F, you move to that specific object. Right? You can also use WASD, and as you might notice, Twinmotion is more like a game when it comes to how you move around, and it is partially due to it actually being developed in a gaming engine. And the good part about that is that it's so optimized that we can have these really nice renderings, um, even in real time. Um, and well, and so that's uh, quite nice. Um, and so except for that, you can also use Q and E to move up and down. And the mouse wheel is or the mouse in general is mostly to pan in different ways, right? You can change the speed by using 1, 2, and 3, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to move faster, right? To move things along, you have the toolbar up here, and then you can, for instance, move, rotate, or scale. And there are a few other tools that I might go through later, but let's start here. So as you can see, the model comes in different parts right now. And that is great and all, but in my case, I'm not planning on ever, let's say, moving any part of the pavilion. So for me to actually have it separately, it doesn't make that much sense. Um, and it just makes the file size bigger and more annoying to work with, right? So if I want to ever move the whole pavilion, it's gonna be quite annoying. So I'm going to delete this, right? And this is what happens if you go for the full scale hierarchy. If we now instead um, import this using, instead of keep hierarchy, like we did before, we collapse by material, or then if you collapse by material, it will collapse it by the different materials you have set in the Rhino model. And so everything that is, let's say, wood will be grouped as one. Everything that's metal will be grouped as one, etc., etc. Right? And I will press collapse all in my case. That's the most convenient. Sure. Uh, Okay. Um, so now that we have a model inside of Twinmotion, um, we see that it's a little bit weird. We'll try to fix it quite soon, but I'll just go through some of the different menus first. We have the library here, and the library is quite great. You have all types of different materials, vegetation, objects, and that's one of the key strengths of Twinmotion. We have the import tab, which we already have tried. We have the scene tab, where you can see all of the different things you've imported into the model so far. Um, you have materials, populate, media, and export. We'll go through all of them later. And we also have this preferences tab. Um, Here you can reduce the quality of the rendering and whatnot if your computer isn't very strong. So this can be good to have a look through. Okay, um, so let's start by opening the material tab. Here we can see that we have one material. Um, and the reason why it looks a little bit weird is actually a really common reason. And it's because Twinmotion is only rendering um, one side of a surface. So all of these are just surfaces right now. So if we press two-sided, now we see that it returns to normal. And the reason why it does this, right, is because um, normally you'd have objects that are solids. Like for instance, if you were to make a pillar, you wouldn't see the inside of the pillar. You wouldn't see the inside of a table. Right? And for Twinmotion to render the inside of a table is way less efficient. So it just makes it invisible. Um, and yeah, that's basically it, right? Um, so materials are quite great, right? You can basically place them whatever material you want, and um, and as you can see, you know the rendering tends to be quite nice. Something to have in mind is if you have some type of pattern, right, your topology needs to be quite good. Right now, if we look at this, you see that the pattern becomes all distorted. There's some ways you can get around this, right? By, let's say, you can change the rotation, you can change the scale of it. Let's say if you had it to be much finer and smaller, you might not notice it as well. Still, the best thing one could do is to have a really good typology. Um, that's not really the easiest thing to do, especially inside of the Rhino environment, but um, yeah, most materials you can change in different ways, like making it more metallic or adding some type of um, make it emissive, then it becomes like a lamp of some sort or glowing. Um, and so there's a lot of interesting things you can do with the materials within Twinmotion. Um, Another feature of Twinmotion that is quite uh, one of the nicer features that you can create interesting topologies by basically just sculpting the land. Um, and for instance, sculpt to make the ground higher or create mountains, ridges. Um, well, um, for instance, and this can be done quite quickly, right? Um, Another function that is quite nice is the foliage one, especially the paint function. Um, you can basically drag and drop different things like trees, um, grasses, say grasses and flowers, um, and let's say we add some rocks as well. Um, and using the paint tool, um, you can oh, paint the landscape um, in different ways. Let's say we bring down the density quite a bit. Oh, and with quite rapidly, you can create some pretty extensive uh, and beautiful places, right? Hmm. Um, Another tool that is quite useful when working in Twinmotion is path. You can create paths where people walk, like this, for instance, and you can change, for instance, the width and the density of how many people that walk through the streets. You can do the same things with vehicles of different sorts. Uh, um, this can be quite useful, especially when you're doing some certain types of renderings or videos or whatnot. But the downside with the people in Twinmotion is that they can look a little bit video gamey, um, maybe 2010-esque, and it's still already quite impressive, right? But um, and you can of course add your own people um, or place them in specific places and have them do different actions, and this can be quite nice, right? It can be quite intuitive to work with, um, but it also depends a little bit on your own creative vision and um, how you want project to be understood, right? And sometimes it might be better to just Photoshop the people into the model instead. Um, so the next thing I will bring up is the media tab. And this is probably one of the uh, most impressive and best features of Twinmotion because of how simple it is. Creating a picture is just making a plus. You can always change where you want to have the picture using the reset button. Be aware that sometimes if you have too many images, it can be laggy, so be a little bit careful of that. Within the picture, you can change time of day, and you can change weather, have it be rainy or winter, for instance. And you can add environments, horizons, and oh, even add an ocean if that's something you want to have in your model. Um, the environment can be somewhat interesting. Um, so you can Um, you can load your own backdrop, basically, using the backdrop H and DRI. Um, like for instance, now um, hmm, um, even though right now it looks a little bit strange. I'm just gonna go for Skydome for now. Um, but you can basically change the environment, which is quite useful times. Um, under camera, you have the focal length. The focal length is quite interesting, right? Because you can it can be particularly useful when you're doing certain very tight interior spaces and you want to show off a lot of things, right? Because normally maybe this is all you'd see, right? Maybe even this. And you can't just move backwards because then you'll start clipping into things. So being able to somehow change the focal length to actually see more in one picture is quite nice. Um, it can also make for more dramatic pictures that and even sometimes if you really don't fit within a picture, changing the focal length is really key to um, getting that sweet picture, right? But be a bit careful with it because you can also end up distorting the image a lot and not representing your project in a truthful manner. Um, so use it with well, some level of care. There's a lot of other types of effects. I'm not going to talk to them about them too much, but parallelism, however, I will talk about. This parallelism is one of the most interesting tools, right? I think most of you should know about parallelism, but it basically makes it so that all of the vertical lines become straight. And this makes for a much better uh, uh, picture in certain cases. You can see it better when, let's say, you look at um, a bigger building. So let's say if we want to third, um, we let's say export this box with let's import this big chunk. So if we look at this right, without parallelism, um, so let's change the focal length so that see the whole building. Right? Without parallelism, you see all of these lines going um, not really perpendicular to the view. I mean, it's fine. You understand the perspective, but it somehow feels distorted. Adding parallelism will give you that kind of straightened feeling. And even if it seems a bit strange, it feels better um, seeing a building that is straight instead of obscured. And so I would say focal length together with parallelism can be uh, some of your best friends. However, both of these together do create a lot of distortions, and especially if you're going to look at something from below, for instance, or above, then parallelism can really mess up the view. Um, Under render, we have some interesting things, but um, in general, um, I usually don't touch it too much, but you can surely play around with it and get better renderings. Um, FX is quite interesting. You can change color gradings, but I think the most interesting one is clay render. If you use clay render, right, you can make more prototype renderings. But I think the best part, I'd also like to change the color, maybe to white. Okay. Um, and one of the best parts with this is that you can do things like only showcase your building with color, and it can make your building pop out a little bit more, um, make it the rendering more interesting, perhaps. Another way you can do it is also to just basically make certain objects in white. So, for instance, if you have a character and you just think that he looks horrible and you want him to be more stylized, then just having a white character can be, well, kind of refreshing. Last tab is the FX, or not the image. You can change the image ratio, and that's good. Um, and here comes two of the best parts. So we're going to talk about the video, and we're going to talk about um, facing groups. With a video, it works the same way as making a picture. The main difference is that now you're working with keyframes. So you put two spots, and then you basically get the camera moving between these two spots. You can also, just as in any picture, change the different settings uh, for um, a specific view. And hmm, this is a bit weird. Um, oh yeah, it seems like Play Render mess with these other settings a little bit. But normally, either way, you'd be able to change um, the global lighting. So let's say you should be able to change if it's raining or snowing, um, just as any other picture, right? Um, okay, so the HDR environment, that's what messed with the sun setting. You can, for instance, change the day night cycle and basically have a rendering that goes from, let's say, summer to winter in one shot. Okay, I think we need to remove the HDR here as well. So, or from night to day. Hmm. You know what? I'm going to quickly retake this video because I think just having the sky dome on, we're messing with the settings a bit. Alright, let's change the time of day and then make it rainy. And Twinmotion is not really responding, which is the first time that happened. So that's kind of a strange thing. Either way, um, um, but normally this works quite perfectly, and you can kind of switch between different times of day and different weathers quite easily. Um, Within the video setting, you can make several clips. So for instance, now we just had almost like a time-lapse eclipse, right? Clip. But something that I would recommend is playing around with different ways of showing your building. One way, for instance, is the pan. I think it's one of the, let's say, nicest ways of showing it. Seems very professional. And so you just move in one direction, right? And now you're slowly kind of showing your building. I would be careful about how much time, how fast to let it pan. And you probably want to find a good balance between not having it too slow, where everybody just starts sleeping, basically, or um, too fast, um, where people start getting kind of nauseous. In this case, I'm gonna put 3 seconds. I think that's pretty okay. Um, I would I usually like to start by having some type of dramatic picture. So, or something that's supposed to be like the nicest view, and uh, maybe a zoom in of the building, right? So something like that. And we probably want to go pretty fast. Try this. Oh. So maybe something like that. Um, if we now pull this apart, we place this as the first one. Now I want to do something of the context, just so that I can see uh, what is my building. Probably want to place the building in the center, and then I just pan a little bit. This right. Um, Let it be 3 seconds as well. And I think that gives a pretty professional, view of what's happening right in the picture. Um, then another pan would be quite nice. You can show the project from a few different perspectives. So maybe another pan like this. Let's go 3 seconds. Um, and now we might want to show off some details that we think are interesting. So let's go here. Um, on here. And we try to work with controlled movements, right? Uh, Show some type of detailing. And then, um, and this together, right? It'll be somewhat of a short movie. Right. And the last thing, if you want to have it within your building, let not show, um, is to add some type of movement. So let's say, but we probably want that to be here at the end. So something similar to moving through your building. Um, and maybe it's more okay if this part is a bit more junky, but in general, you want to make sure that you don't have too many of these pieces or movement patterns together, because otherwise you're going to have a kind of a bad experience and just make people nauseous and have these really strange movements. Like we go like this, for instance. Um, this will basically be a really horrible experience. So you don't want to do that. Um, unless you do it intentionally for some malicious reason. But uh, yeah, and you'll have to use your own artistic reasoning when doing this. But I think this is a pretty good template for making somewhat nice looking video, right? And when you're done, we'll go into export tab. And here you basically um, press the plus button and you choose the video you want to export. And when you're ready, you can start exporting. It can be worth thinking about the frame rate and whatnot, but of course, adding more frames to any video will extend it by quite a lot. These are the key points of working with Twinmotion. Um, there, yesterday there were a few other questions in regards to, let's say, Blender and Twinmotion. I believe there are ways of getting materials from Blender, but you have to bake them and whatnot. I'm not an expert on Blender uh, anymore, but I might make another video with Blender and Twinmotion in mind. But right now you can find some more information in a tutorial that I linked in group for public buildings. Other than that, um, uh, I believe most of the things I wanted to talk about have been said. So have a nice evening and good luck.